Katie Coleman is with Iowa Select Farms. She graduated from the University of Minnesota here in 2015, and for the last 8 years she's been with Iowa Select. She's the director of biosecurity. So this is going to focus on outcomes and how you use outbreak investigations to improve biosecurity in the system. And Katie lives in Fort Dodge, Iowa with her husband and her dog.
Thank you, Dr. Sundberg. Can you hear me all right in the back? Good deal. Again, I'm Katie Coleman with Iowa Select Farms. I am a veterinarian, been there for about 8 years, and then I also oversee biosecurity. Today we're going to be talking about utilizing outbreak investigations to improve biosecurity within a system. So as I started working on my presentation, I realized that I probably could have titled it Outbreak Investigations, Why, How, and Then What. A little bit about Iowa Select. This is a map mostly showing the state of Iowa. You can see any of those counties that are shaded in gray would be counties where we have nursery, grow finish, any of our gilt sites as well. Any county that has a pink pig in it, those are where we have sow farms at. So it might be one sow farm, it might be multiple sow farms. You can see we have one sow farm in Nebraska as well. If you've driven through Iowa, you're familiar with Iowa a little bit, you know that it's also populated with a lot of growing pigs in that area as well. So we are no stranger to disease pressure. So it turns out that we've done a few disease investigations over time. So typically we're looking at PRRS or PED investigations on sow farms, any of our off-site gilt development units or other growing gilt sites. Moving into the why we feel that investigations in the face of an outbreak are important. You know, you can go into it and sometimes feel a little bit discouraged about not finding a smoking gun. One of my favorite quotes when it comes to biosecurity investigations, I haven't quite figured out who said it first, but I've heard it a few times and I think it really resonates, is that I don't always find a smoking gun when I do an investigation, but as I start to look around, I usually find a bunch of loaded ones sitting around. And so that's typically the outcome that we get with a lot of these investigations, but I think there's tremendous value in looking for those opportunity areas along the way. Again, really feel that it's worth the investment of time to identify those gaps in biosecurity. The other thing that I think is important that sometimes gets overlooked is that value in verifying the processes that are getting done correctly. So sometimes as you look through, you start to feel really good about certain aspects, but of course you're always going to be evaluating those vulnerabilities as well. Like Dr. Holtkamp quoted, this quote was attributed to Albert Einstein: "In the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity." So Dr. Holtkamp said, don't let a crisis go to waste. I completely agree. You know, we always want to be on the preventative side as much as possible, but in the event of a PRRS or a PED outbreak, I think that is a good time to get into action and look for those opportunity areas. Our goal with outbreak investigations is always continuous improvement. How can we get better? So whether we're looking at facilities and improvement in those, how we train, the way that we really approach employee engagement with biosecurity, also collaboration with support departments and external visitors. It's a good chance to really revisit those things, and sometimes it results in process changes as well. We'll jump into the how. In my experience, it's really important to avoid finger pointing on these investigations. So as we look at that, you can really get into a round and around, or if you start with finger pointing, sometimes people really put their guard up. So approaching it from a standpoint of, you know, we're all just here to get better. We're not looking for someone to blame. Going into them with an open mind is really important. Whether it's our ego, like Dr. Holtkamp said, or just getting blinders on. You know, if it's a farm that we visit frequently, it can be easy to overlook some of the things that we see all the time. So trying to approach them with that open mind is important. And then also asking some open-ended questions. So I like the idea of having a standard set of areas to observe, questions to ask, things to investigate. You can see my very rudimentary list of areas, just a snapshot of part of that, of things that we look at when we're doing an investigation. Usually I print that out when I do my on-farm investigation so that I can kind of keep myself on track and make sure that I hit all of those areas. We utilize records as well as on-farm observations and talking with farm staff. So starting out, I really like to set the scene. You know, what kind of farm are we talking about? What's the layout? A little bit about that geography. Clinical signs, how did things start? As well as where did those clinical signs start? Sometimes that kind of gives you some traction on places to look, as well as testing history. Digging in on animal movement important. So where animals have come from and prior testing, reviewing those transportation records, trailers, semi-tractors, and drivers. So we'll use a combination of the records that we have for our load schedule as well as GPS to verify those things. We have virtual visitor logs, so all of that is stored digitally. When you go to a farm, the farm manager or department head would sign you in on our internal program. So utilizing those as a starting point to look at who's been on that farm. And in addition, we can utilize GPS records for other Iowa Select vehicles that have come on site. Recent site visits and biosecurity assessments are another thing to look at. Are there some vulnerabilities that we've already identified that we can start with and dig into more? Another area that we've really found a lot of value in is reviewing video footage. So we utilize video reviews as a part of our biosecurity assessment to look at the execution that we have on our farm, of our protocols, as well as just an ongoing training piece, an aspect of that. For every investigation, we look back at all of the footage that we have stored on our server. Typically, it's about 30 days worth of footage. And when I say that we look at that, really one of our gals in the office does a phenomenal job of looking through that, identifying any non-compliances with biosecurity. The areas that we really focus on are the areas that we feel are very critical, so the bench entry, the UV chamber if the farm has one, the D&D room looking at supplies that are coming into the farm, load in, load out events, and mortality removal. So I have a few examples of what that video footage would look like. This would be the bench entry in one of our farms. You're able to see everyone that's coming in and out of that farm and watch the processes that happen there. Here's an example of the UV chambers at that same farm. Again, you're able to see what items are going in there. Did the UV chamber get started? Aspects like that. This would be an example of a transition room. So we would receive gilts in this room. We would load culls in here to send those out. It'd be a very similar room for wean pigs on a sow farm. So another area to be able to see what goes on, see if there's any non-compliance areas there. And then just a couple examples of a few different farms and examples of their chute area. Continuing on, going on farm, it doesn't always happen for us with our investigations, but I think it's a good idea to consider having some fresh eyes to approach that investigation. So bringing someone with you or sending maybe a different veterinarian, someone else that maybe doesn't visit that farm all the time. It's a great idea to be able to just get different perspectives there. And again, just being observant and approaching with an open mind, I think, is very important. You always want to be as unbiased as possible. Of course, we all carry our own biases with us. We might be aware of some of the limitations that we have on farms, but I think it's also really important to acknowledge it if it's a risk area. So it might be something that we've chosen not to invest in or change in the past, but maybe going forward, if we identify that as a risk area, that could be something that we look at making some changes on. And then spending time with farm staff. So like Dr. Talbot said, memories aren't perfect. We might not get all of the information, but I think there's a lot of value in talking to people that work on our farms every day that are very invested in biosecurity and the health of our farms to see if they can remember anything unusual that's happened or any biosecurity areas where they feel like we're lacking. It's also a good time to double check on those visitor logs, make sure that we didn't miss any visitors in getting signed in, looking at our D&D logs, and also the frequency of those events. Are we entering supplies every couple weeks? Are we entering supplies multiple times every single week? Maybe there's some process things that we can look at changing there. And I think very importantly is then what? So I've spent quite a bit of time investing in this outbreak investigation by this point. It's not going to be very fruitful if we don't do anything with that information. So following up on individual issues, certainly on a case-by-case basis, is a good place to start. It might be as simple as just coaching for our employees or any of our visitors that come to the farm if there's some non-compliance areas that are identified. Might be looking at some of those process changes that we talked about, and also thinking about, if we're missing the mark on this farm, maybe we need to do a little bit more additional focus across the system for multiple farms. It might be something that we're missing on other farms as well. And then also, if you're unfortunate enough to have multiple outbreak investigations within a period of time, you might be able to compile some information from multiple sites. So it's not a fancy Excel sheet by any means, but every row on here is an example of a farm where we've done an outbreak investigation, and then the columns would be buckets or categories of areas that were identified as risks. So I know the font is incredibly small here, but really what I want to demonstrate is as you look across each individual farm, there's multiple things that were identified in each of those cases, and you can also look through the columns and say, well, gosh, there might be several examples of external visitors that we had some concerns or issues with. Maybe there's something that we could do better there. So looking for those patterns and then evaluating those risk areas. So again, looking at frequency of events, the type of event, and then looking to decide what those next steps are. So it can sometimes be difficult to assign an exact value on that to get a true return on investment. But as you look at those things, if they're coming up multiple times or you feel like they're a big risk area, it might be something to invest in. And then also looking at additional training. Like I said, if it's a problem at one farm, it might be a problem at multiple farms. So looking at ways that we can give our employees the resources and the tools to do things well. I think the other part that sometimes we miss, and I've missed it myself in the past, is meeting with key players. So following up that farm manager and staff, I think there's some degree of closure that comes with that. Again, we might not have a smoking gun, but we can talk through some of the areas that we identified. Reaching out to specific individuals and groups on non-compliance areas, so whether that's a support department, external visitors, or just sitting down and collaborating with someone and saying, hey, we don't love the way this is being done right now, or there's some solutions that we can find. Sharing those findings with key individuals involved, so that might involve sitting down with production staff, other veterinarians, and support departments, and again, just having that open conversation about those areas of opportunity. So a few examples that we've had within our system. So this is an example of a PERS investigation on a gilt grow-out site. It was a natural vent curtain-sided barn. The PERS outbreak occurred in December. Myself and another veterinarian went to the site to do the outbreak investigation. We pulled onto the site and we thought, gosh, those curtains look really good. Like, a lot better than the last time I was here. So as we talked with the manager, we found out that those curtains had just recently been replaced. There may have been some things that were missing as far as communication. With that process, it wasn't entirely clear where the curtain crew was before. And so it rose towards the top of our risk areas as we looked at that investigation. When we sat down and talked about that, we said maybe we need a process change here as far as how we approach R&M projects during certain times of the year. So we can say, let's look at the winter as a riskier time of year. Can we do some of these projects in the spring to the fall? I'm sure we have plenty of finishing sites that could use new curtains during the winter instead of our gilt grow-out sites. I think the other aspect to think about with that too is to continue to evaluate through the entire investigation. So we pulled up and that was really the first thing that we noticed was those curtains, but still looking for other risk areas and seeing what other opportunities exist. Another example was a PERS investigation on a filtered sow farm. So reviewing video footage and having some discussion with the manager, there was a non-compliance in item entry that had happened with that. So it gave us a chance to follow up with the support department. I don't know that we would have necessarily found that unless that manager had mentioned it at a different time, had it not been for the outbreak. So of course we would have loved to not have that outbreak investigation at all. But we were able to follow up with that support department, clear up some confusion, and feel a lot better about having a consistent process going forward. Again, not stopping there, looking for other risk areas. We also were aware of 2 finishing sites within a mile and a half of that site that had an incredibly similar PERS strain. It was 99.5% homology or greater on OR5 sequencing. So we know that there were multiple risk areas involved in this case. So going forward, we're going to continue to plan on focusing on proactive measures as much as possible. I don't want to be really good at outbreak investigations because of having to do them many, many times. I would love if it was an extremely infrequent event and I'd have to call Dr. Holtkamp and say, hey, how do I start this again? That would be my goal. So having a biosecurity focus during site visits, and maybe we look at those outbreak investigations, like Dr. Holtkamp said, as more of a proactive thing and doing them outside of an actual outbreak, to use them in that way. Continued education and clarification for our farm teams and support departments. Dr. Talbot mentioned this in her talk yesterday. Biosecurity can be very difficult because when everything's going right, nothing happens. And so you don't get that immediate gratification of I'm doing something and I get a result or a reward right away. And so it's keeping people motivated and helping them to engage and understand why we do the biosecurity that we do. And also we're going to continue to utilize those video reviews both from a training and an assessment standpoint. So in the event of an outbreak, I am excited to use Iowa State's outbreak investigation tool. I think that's an excellent tool to create that standardized form and to be able to apply it amongst all of us and for us to share our data, I think will be really exciting. And then we'll supplement those with our video reviews and the on-farm investigation and some of the things that we've already got in place. I really feel there's a tremendous amount of value in the process of doing an outbreak investigation. I know it can be really frustrating when there's not a clear smoking gun, but I can almost promise you that you'll find some opportunity areas if you look hard enough. The information from the outbreak investigations can really aid in decision making and help us to make good decisions. And also I think it's really important to share those findings with key individuals or groups. So always keeping that goal in mind of how can we get better. And I welcome any questions.
Okay, questions for Katie? You don't have any, John?
I'm waiting for the panel.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering because you showed cameras or cameras in your farms, where we have about 20 sites, and we also have cameras in our farms. But my question is there? The question we always ask is we install these technologies, cameras, GPS, or something like that. The question is who's looking at it? In your farm, do you hire someone to sit down in a room with television to just watch what's going on in the farms or something like that? Or do you have a technology that basically does?
Yeah, that's a great question. So looking at the cameras that we have installed in our farms, who's reviewing that footage or how are we using that, or are there other technologies? I know there's a lot of different options out there. Today within Iowa Select, the people that have access to it would primarily be our production supervisors and our veterinary staff, as well as our production well-being team, so they would handle all of our animal well-being and biosecurity assessments. So that would basically be the group that has access to it. We don't have a continual monitoring of our videos at this point in time. Typically, as we're using them for a training standpoint, a lot of times I look at it like a site visit, so I might watch maybe site entry over a weekend, or I might watch critical areas at different times. But at this point in time, we don't have any additional technology or anyone else that's doing those. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
So Katie, are those cameras set up to only record when there's motion detected?
Yes, so John's asking if the cameras are set up to only record when there's motion detected, and they are. So they'll actually flip ahead to the next time when motion is detected if you're watching it. You can also adjust the speed. The limitation to that is if there's a fly crawling across the camera or there's a cobweb moving, you can watch a few minutes of that as well.
Go ahead, Paul.
I'm not sure if I heard the first question, but have you looked at AI for that to go ahead and look at all that footage for you?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, he's asking about AI and looking at that footage for us. We have not endeavored down that path at this point in time, but I believe there's some opportunity there.
Sure. I noticed it looked like your survey instrument was more open-ended, which can help you find things that you wouldn't have thought to ask. But tracking metrics over time, do you have a way to take those open-ended and put it in a format where you can track an area over time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So our current format that we've been using is pretty open-ended, and so you're asking about, how can we do a good job of tracking that over time, or what have we done? That spreadsheet that I showed you that was in pretty small font is about as advanced as we've gotten, and so I'm really excited about the work that Dr. Holtkamp and his team is doing in order to have a good way to plug that data in and really get a concise report from it. I think our goal is really to marry those things together, to utilize that type of report formatting as well as asking some of those open-ended questions to get hopefully the most well-rounded information we can.
Katie, can you speak to the information you have for trailers going in and out, and like the history on cleaning, that sort of information? What access do you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thinking about trucks and trailers that go onto our farms, what access to information do we have about those? So we would have GPS in all of our Iowa Select owned vehicles, so I'd be able to track which truck actually came on site. We'd have record of which trailers were used, and then within our internal wash system, so how they keep track of things out at the truck wash, there's a log of which trailers got washed at what time and which time they went through an internal baker as well. That would apply to any of the trailers that would have any impact on our sow farms or our goats.
Yeah, Paul?
What's the most unexpected thing you found?
Oh, man. What's the most unexpected thing that I've found? I feel like I don't have as good of stories as some of our colleagues. Oh, Pete has one. He'd like to share.
The wing pig driver was tipping the...
Oh, yeah. There was some video footage that was viewed at one point in time, and there were 2 female sow farm caretakers in the transition room loading out wean pigs. And our wean pig driver thought they were doing an excellent job at the time, and he would have liked to give them a monetary reward for that. He wanted to give them a tip. And they said, no, you can't cross the clean dirty line. And he proceeded to reach in and try to put it into the hoods of one of their sweatshirts.
War stories, right?
Paul, are you free?
No, I'm not, I don't plan.
Well, I'll ask my question.
Yeah, ask your question.
Okay.
Ask it now.
So,
Of any of them.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is for all 3 presenters, but over the years in my former life, right, we would do an outbreak investigation, maybe not find a smoking gun or even a close answer, but it resulted oftentimes in adding another page to the SOP. And I just wonder, will any of these tools help us start to remove some of those things that have become a barrier to the caregivers doing their job?
Yeah.
Okay, so to repeat that, as you find more and more loaded guns rather than smoking guns, it adds more and more pages to the SOPs for biosecurity. And the question is, how do you use this technology and how do you use the advancements to help simplify that and start removing some of those because they aren't the real issues that you need to focus on. Is that fair, John?
That's very good.
Okay, all right, so Darryl, stand it up.
Yeah, I'll take a crack. So I'll give you one example, John, and Paul, you're going to recognize this. And I see this quite frequently, where you've got a loaded room, right? Transition room, stage loading, set up. Great idea, right? You run all the wean pigs or the cull sows in there. It's a clean area at that point. As soon as you close the door, it's considered a dirty area, and then you open it up, the chute, and send them out, right? Can't tell you how many times when we've stood there and talked about how they do that process, right? And you know, you talk about what happens after the pigs are loaded and the truck goes away, and they get out the power washer, they clean that room, disinfect it, and then you start talking about that, and you see, well, the floor of the stage loading room slopes back into the barn, right? And there's a gap under the door, and then oftentimes the drain is right ahead of the door there, right? And so you start talking that through, and you say, well, you know, when you do that, do you sometimes see water, wash back into the you know, the alley or the alleyway in the barn, which often is the main alleyway, right? They say, well, yeah, sure, that happens every time, right? And so you think about that. If there was anything, any contamination, any viruses on that trailer that you're trying to keep out of the barns, you're doing a pretty good job of washing them back into the barn, right? So there would be an SOP that I would eliminate, right? You mentioned, well, the real answer there is to redesign that loadout area, but you've already got that to work with. But, you know, there might be some other things you could do to replace that, but certainly there's an opportunity there to improve an SOP, maybe not eliminate it, but I'd quit doing that. Right? So, yeah, I mean, but we want to make more work than that.
So, meetings are sometimes just like closets, and you fill them up to whatever the roof is, whatever, fill up that closet until it's full. We don't have to do that with this, but I want to close with some thoughts about John's questions about how do you focus on the most important things and take those SOPs. Daryl just gave a good example. The swine disease reporting system that SHIC has supported puts together test information from the veterinary diagnostic labs around the country into a database that is analyzable and mineable, so we can look for disease trends or emerging issues. Think about the power that Katie's spreadsheet could have up there that she showed if that was coming from everybody. The same thing, standardized in the same manner, was coming from everybody around the country in the pork industry to put together into a database that is mineable and analyzable, so you can focus on the things that matter. We can look at it and focus on those things, and perhaps, John, that'll help us decrease that, oh, we got to do everything for everybody, but we can focus on those things that are most important. This standardized outbreak investigation has the opportunity to change the way we do biosecurity if we all support it. And that's an if we all support it, and if we make it better. So it's a work in progress all the time, and Daryl will tell you we'll change it if we have to. But watch for that and consider implementing that on your farms and in your practices. And with that, I'm going to help me thank these three for their efforts and for